Terry and Sue were what most people would call a typical, content married couple. Terry worked as an insurance fraud investigator, while Sue held a position as an executive secretary at a major investment firm. After decades of dedication, 30 years in their careers and 25 years of marriage, they were both approaching retirement and looking forward to finally slowing down. Travel plans filled many of their conversations: road trips across the country, cruises through the Caribbean and Mexico, and eventually exploring Europe. But beyond travel, Sue quietly felt something else was missing: an extra spark. Long before their marriage, Terry had briefly experimented with crossdressing. It had been something they both assumed was left behind in the past. Recently, however, Sue found herself wondering if revisiting that side of Terry might bring a new kind of excitement into their lives. The idea intrigued her, but she knew she had to be careful. She didn't want Terry to feel criticized or uncomfortable, nor did she want to risk the closeness they shared. So, Sue devised a subtle plan, something gradual, almost unnoticeable. One evening after work, she stopped by the mall and picked out several shirts. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but they were designed slightly differently: softer fabrics, more tailored fits, and buttons placed on the opposite side. The next day, Sue got home before Terry and laid out his clothes as usual, slipping in one of the new shirts. When Terry got ready for dinner, he didn't notice anything unusual. The evening went smoothly, filled with casual conversation about their future travels. On Monday morning, when Terry overslept and rushed to get ready, Sue repeated the same quiet substitution. This time, something interesting happened. At work, a few coworkers complimented him. They mentioned how his shirt looked nicer, softer, more refined. Terry brushed it off, slightly puzzled but pleased. Sue didn't push too far. She spaced out the changes, occasionally swapping in another shirt. Each time, Terry received similar compliments. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he began appreciating the feel and fit of the new clothes. By the end of the week, Terry finally noticed the difference. As he dressed for a dinner date, he paused. The fabric felt smoother, lighter. Then he noticed the buttons. Slightly different. Later that night, while they sat together at a movie, Sue gently rested her hand on his shoulder, letting it drift across the soft fabric. Terry felt an unexpected comfort, a calm warmth he hadn't quite experienced before. On the way home, curiosity got the better of him. "Sue, this shirt, is it new?" She smiled softly. "Yes, I thought it was time you tried something different." Terry admitted he liked it, especially after all the compliments he'd received. Sue nodded. "You've worn the same styles for years. With retirement coming, I thought it might be nice to ease into something new, something more comfortable. And honestly," she added with a playful tone, "it feels better when I touch you." Terry chuckled, still unsure what to make of it all, but he couldn't deny it. The change felt good. And without realizing it, something new had already begun. At first, Terry noticed that the shirts felt a little different, especially the way they buttoned compared to his old ones. Still, Sue brushed it off casually. She didn't want to raise any doubts, so instead of explaining they were actually blouses, she simply told him she'd picked them up at Macy's because they looked good and she hadn't found anything appealing in the men's section. She reassured him that the difference was so minor no one would ever notice. People didn't pay attention to which side buttons were on anyway. That explanation seemed to satisfy Terry, and he dropped the subject entirely. Not long after, Sue introduced another change. She suggested he try a modern hairstyle to better match his updated wardrobe. Terry had always kept his hair long, usually tied back in a simple ponytail for work. But now Sue began working on it, adding volume and shaping it over several evenings. By the time Monday came around, Terry went to work without his usual ponytail. Encouraged by how easily he had accepted the shirts, Sue grew more confident. As the weather warmed, she bought lighter, softer fabrics. Terry appreciated the comfort and didn't question it. The women at work noticed, complimenting his clothing choices, while most of the men remained oblivious. The women, however, quietly recognized that his shirts weren't typical men's wear, though none of them said anything. Soon, Sue was selecting his outfits daily. His hairstyle also drew attention, mostly from the women, while only one male coworker casually remarked on how long his hair actually was. Months passed without issue, and Sue's plan continued smoothly. With retirement approaching, she felt certain Terry would be quite different by then, if only he realized it. When colder weather arrived, Sue transitioned to heavier shirts, along with softer undershirts. Terry noticed the difference again, but Sue explained they were simply on sale and more comfortable. Her reasoning seemed practical, and he accepted it. Eventually, she took a bigger step. One evening, she laid out a cami instead of his usual undershirt. Terry questioned it immediately, but Sue calmly explained that his regular shirts hadn't been washed. She reassured him it would keep him warm and that no one would ever see it. Reluctantly, he agreed, and nothing unusual happened. Afterward, Sue checked in with him. When he admitted it wasn't uncomfortable, she continued. On her next shopping trip, she bought several more camis, gradually introducing slightly more feminine ones over time. She paired them with small compliments and affectionate gestures, making the change feel natural rather than forced. Terry stopped objecting altogether. Meanwhile, she continued refining his hair, trimming it weekly, adding volume, and eventually soft curls. His coworkers began to notice more. One woman even suggested adding waves for fullness. When Terry mentioned it at home, Sue quickly embraced the idea, enhancing the style further. By spring, Terry's transformation had become routine to him. New shirts no longer raised questions. Since his old undershirts were gone, camis had quietly become his norm. Still, Sue proceeded carefully, gradually introducing thinner fabrics so the changes wouldn't be too obvious. Over time, subtle details began to show through his clothing. The women at work started to suspect more clearly what he was wearing underneath. They already knew his shirts were unusual, but now they were beginning to notice something else. Sue anticipated this and planned her next steps just as carefully, continuing her gradual approach, knowing that patience had been the key to everything so far. Sue realized that if she wanted Terry to fully accept the more delicate camis, she would need to push him just a little further. A subtle approach had worked so far, but this step would require something bolder. One Saturday evening, as they were getting ready to go out for a movie, Sue made her move. While Terry was in the shower, she selected one of her own silky camis, trimmed with lace, and placed it neatly with his clothes. The reaction was immediate. "What is this?" Terry shouted from the bedroom. Sue walked in calmly, smiling as if nothing was unusual. She wrapped her arms around him and spoke gently, telling him she thought it might make things more exciting later if she knew he was wearing something softer beneath his shirt. She even hinted at a reward, letting the suggestion linger. Terry barely registered her wording. His focus shifted entirely to what she had promised. And that night, she made sure to follow through. Just before they left the house, Sue handed him something else, a small clutch bag. Terry looked confused. "Why do I need this?" he asked. Sue explained that his pockets always looked bulky with everything he carried, and that a small bag would keep his clothes looking neater. By then, she had already gathered his wallet, keys, and other essentials and placed them inside. With a simple explanation and a practical reason, she made it seem like an easy choice. By Monday, Terry carried the bag to work. To his surprise, no one said anything, which reassured him. With that hurdle cleared, Sue continued introducing more changes at home. Gradually, the softer camis became part of his everyday routine. As his shirts grew lighter with the changing season, subtle details began to show through. The women at work started noticing not just the shirts, but what might be underneath. One day, a coworker casually remarked that he must be more comfortable wearing lighter undershirts in the heat. Another even referred to them as camis, complimenting his practicality. She also admired his small bag, saying she might get one herself. Terry kept his composure, thanking her, though the comments lingered in his mind. When he told Sue about it, she didn't hesitate. She knew the moment of surprise could be turned into progress. Before he had time to dwell on it, she introduced something new, a silky half-slip. As usual, Terry questioned it. But Sue framed it as just another variation, something to make things more interesting. Once again, she paired the suggestion with the promise of a reward. That was enough. Soon, The changes extended further. Sue replaced his old pants with softer, more tailored slacks. Without the usual pockets, the small bag became even more practical. Terry barely questioned it. After all, the reasoning seemed sensible. At work, the changes didn't go entirely unnoticed. The women picked up on the lighter fabrics and subtle differences, often commenting on how comfortable he must be. The men, on the other hand, mostly shrugged it off, assuming it was simply his wife encouraging a more modern look. Terry adjusted more quickly than he expected. In fact, he began to enjoy the feel of the softer materials. One evening at the movies, Sue leaned close to him as the lights dimmed. Her touch was more deliberate this time, her hands lingering in a way that made him unusually aware of the fabric against his skin. The sensation was new, subtle, but unmistakable. He couldn't quite explain it, but it stayed with him. Whatever hesitation he once had continued to fade. By now, Sue knew she had influence. Each change met less resistance than the last. It was no longer about convincing him, it was about shaping what came next. That weekend, she turned her attention back to his hair. She suggested thinning it out for the warmer weather, mentioning it would feel lighter and easier to manage. Terry recalled a coworker making a similar suggestion, which only reinforced the idea. Sue got to work. When she finished, the result was noticeably different. The volume was gone, replaced with a flatter, sleeker look. Terry wasn't entirely sure about it, but Sue was already thinking ahead. She had another idea in mind. Sue assured Terry that she could adjust his hair, though it would take some time. After several hours of careful work, the new style was finally complete. When Terry looked at himself, he noticed how soft and refined it appeared. It wasn't quite what he was used to, but if Sue liked it, he didn't feel the need to question it, even if it leaned toward a more delicate look. When Monday arrived, his coworkers noticed immediately. "I love your hair," one woman exclaimed. "Who styled it?" "It goes so well with your outfits," another added. Comments like these no longer shocked him the way they once had. Though he still felt a flicker of discomfort when someone referred to his shirts in a more feminine way, he had come to trust Sue's judgment. Over the next few weeks, Sue continued her gradual approach. The slips Terry wore began to change, first subtle differences, then thinner straps, more delicate designs. She didn't rush it. Instead, she blended the changes into his routine until they felt almost ordinary. As the weather warmed and his clothing grew lighter, the details became more noticeable. The women at work began to pick up on it. "Your wife must be thoughtful," one commented. "Those lighter underlayers must be much more comfortable in this heat." Terry simply nodded, offering a quiet thanks, though inside he felt a mix of surprise and unease. It was becoming clear that people were noticing more than he had expected. Sue, however, saw this as progress. Not long after, she introduced another change: shoes. At first, she asked him to help break in a pair that were too tight for her. Terry didn't think much of it, wearing them around the house in the evenings. Before long, it became routine. Then came the shift. His usual footwear was replaced with softer, more fitted styles. Flats at first, nothing too noticeable, but gradually the heel height increased. By the time he realized it, he was wearing slightly raised heels to work. Once again, the women noticed. "They really suit your look," one coworker told him. "They give you a nicer stride." That comment stayed with him. That evening, Terry admitted to Sue that he felt confused. He told her that while he couldn't deny how comfortable everything felt, or how much he enjoyed the attention and her affection, he still felt uncertain. People were noticing, sometimes staring. Sue reassured him calmly. She explained that confidence mattered more than anything else. If he was comfortable in himself, then what he wore didn't define him negatively. She emphasized that she would never push him into anything harmful, and that everything she suggested was meant to enhance how he looked and felt. Her words settled him, for now. Encouraged by his willingness, Sue moved forward. She introduced more refined pieces, carefully timing each step, so it wouldn't feel overwhelming. By now, Terry had stopped resisting. The changes had become part of his routine, even if he didn't fully understand how far things had gone. Eventually, she introduced a new underlayer design to improve the way his shirts fit. When Terry noticed the difference in the mirror, he couldn't quite place it, but his clothing seemed to fall more smoothly. When he asked Sue about it later, she explained it simply. The new piece helped shape the fabric so his shirts would look neater and more tailored. That explanation made sense to him. At work, a coworker noticed the difference almost immediately. "Something's changed," she said. "Your clothes fit much better now." Terry tried to downplay it, repeating Sue's explanation, but he could tell she understood more than she was saying. The comment made him aware, once again, of how visible these changes had become. When he brought it up at home, Sue calmly reinforced her reasoning. She explained that better structure under clothing naturally improved the overall look. It wasn't about changing who he was, it was about presenting himself well. She also pointed out something else. People were already used to his evolving appearance. Each small step had prepared them for the next. That thought stuck with him. Gradually, Terry stopped questioning each new addition. If anything, he began to focus more on how it all felt: lighter fabrics, smoother textures, a different kind of comfort he hadn't expected. Sue noticed this shift and continued guiding him, always just one step ahead. By the time she introduced the next change, she made sure it happened quickly, giving Terry little time to overthink it. She explained that it would provide a better shape under his shirts, more natural and consistent than before. Terry hesitated, but only briefly. At this point, so many changes had already taken place that this felt like just another adjustment. And once again, Sue reassured him, guiding him through it calmly. When he finally looked at himself, he couldn't deny the result. It created a smoother, more defined appearance. Different, yes, but undeniably polished. For a moment, he wondered how far things had gone, and how much further they might go. But as before, that thought faded. Because by now, resisting felt harder than simply trusting her. And Sue knew it. Terry felt an unexpected shift within himself. His thoughts and emotions seemed to soften, filling with unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting sensations. There was something undeniably alluring about it, though he kept those feelings private. As he got ready for work, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his appearance had already changed. He wondered what people thought when they saw him outside, at restaurants, at the movies, just living his everyday life. His wife's earlier words echoed in his mind, blending in required embracing a more feminine presentation. At first, it had seemed odd, but now it was beginning to make sense. Before he could think too deeply, Sue handed him a blouse, far more delicate and stylish than anything he had worn before. When paired with the bra and breast forms, everything seemed to fall into place. Without them, the blouses didn't sit right. Now they shaped naturally, giving him a silhouette that looked complete. The sensation was new, but not uncomfortable. In fact, as the forms warmed against his body, he found himself adjusting, even enjoying the feeling. Standing in front of the mirror, he noticed the subtle movement as he walked, the way everything seemed to respond naturally. It startled him at first, but also fascinated him. Sue interrupted his thoughts, guiding him to add a slip beneath the blouse. She explained that it would complete the look, ensuring everything appeared polished and appropriate for work. When he saw himself again, he had to admit, she was right. The fit, the shape, the overall presentation, it all worked. Still, he kept his deeper feelings to himself. Sue wasn't finished. She sat him down and began refining his appearance further: light makeup, subtle adjustments, softening details he had never paid attention to before. As she worked, she explained her reasoning gently but clearly. If he was going to present himself this way, everything needed to align. When he finally looked in the mirror again, he was surprised. The reflection staring back at him looked refined, composed, even elegant. It was undeniably different, yet he couldn't deny that it suited him. At work, the changes didn't go unnoticed. His coworkers commented, some teasing, some complimentary, but none outright negative. In fact, as the day went on, he realized people were treating him with a kind of warmth he hadn't experienced before. Conversations felt lighter. Interactions felt easier. At first, it was embarrassing, but gradually, that discomfort faded, replaced by something else: acceptance, maybe even confidence. By the end of the week, Terry admitted to Sue that he was adjusting. More than that, he was starting to enjoy it. The attention, the kindness, the sense of being seen differently. It all affected him in ways he hadn't expected. Sue listened pleased. She had always believed this side of him existed, waiting to be expressed. Now that it was emerging, she encouraged him to embrace it fully. Over the weekend, she continued helping him refine his look, small changes, subtle improvements. Grooming, presentation, posture, each detail added to the overall transformation. This time, Terry didn't resist. Instead, he leaned into it, appreciating each step. When he returned to work, the response was immediate. His coworkers noticed the added confidence, the polished appearance. Their reactions, rather than discouraging him, reinforced the changes. Compliments replaced curiosity. Familiarity replaced surprise. For Terry, something had shifted. What began as uncertainty had slowly turned into acceptance, and perhaps even excitement. Each day brought something new, and instead of resisting it, he found himself anticipating what came next. That evening, as he stood in front of the mirror once more, fully prepared for the day ahead, he paused. For the first time, he didn't feel conflicted. He simply felt complete. Terry felt as though a final barrier inside her had finally dissolved. The identity she had quietly longed for no longer felt distant or hidden. It felt real. For the first time in her life, she wasn't holding anything back. There was a calm certainty within her, a deep sense of fulfillment she had never known before. With a quiet confidence and a gentle, graceful stride, she left for work. When Terry arrived, she slipped into the office a little later than usual and made her way to her desk without drawing attention. At first, no one seemed to notice. But as the morning progressed and coworkers began passing by, everything changed. From a distance, nothing seemed unusual, but up close, it was undeniable. Terry's appearance had evolved completely. The skirt, the heels, the soft details of her outfit, the accessories, everything about her presentation now reflected who she truly was. One by one, her coworkers began to react. Compliments started softly, then grew more open and warm. Some admired her outfit, others her confidence. A few joked lightheartedly, easing any tension, and soon the entire office felt filled with a sense of celebration rather than surprise. Gail laughed and said, "Where did this new woman come from? I think she's raising the bar for all of us." That broke the ice, and laughter spread through the room. Encouraged by their kindness, Terry stood and addressed them. She thanked everyone for their patience and support, explaining that even she hadn't fully understood what was happening at first. What began as small changes had slowly revealed something much deeper, something she had carried within herself for years without fully realizing it. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier. "I'm still the same person you've always known," she said, "but now I'm finally being honest about who I am." The room responded with warmth and acceptance. There was no resistance, only encouragement. Later that day, her supervisor approached and presented her with a retirement plaque. The inscription honored her years of dedication and service, but it also symbolized something more, a closing chapter and the beginning of another. As she read it, Terry smiled. She didn't dwell on the past for long. Instead, she turned back to her coworkers, who surrounded her with congratulations, laughter, and genuine affection. As she left the office, someone called out jokingly, "We always knew the best man for the job was a woman." The room erupted in cheerful laughter, and Terry couldn't help but laugh along. That evening, she returned home glowing with happiness. She told Sue everything, the reactions, the support, the unexpected kindness. If she had known it would feel like this, she admitted, she might have embraced this part of herself much sooner. For the first time, she spoke openly about her feelings, about how long she had carried them, how afraid she had been, and how grateful she now felt. Sue listened with a gentle smile. She explained that she had seen the signs long ago, the quiet glances, the unspoken curiosity, the way Terry seemed drawn to something she couldn't yet express. What started as a small nudge had grown into something transformative. Their conversation that night was filled with honesty, understanding, and mutual support. There were no doubts left, only clarity about the path ahead. In time, Terry fully embraced her new life. With patience and care, she continued her journey, becoming more confident and comfortable in herself with each passing day. When she eventually returned to visit her old workplace, the reception was joyful. Her former coworkers welcomed her warmly, amazed by her confidence and how naturally she carried herself. There was no longer any question in anyone's mind. Terry had found her place. Years passed, and she and Sue built a life filled with happiness, companionship, and peace. Their relationship deepened, grounded in honesty and acceptance. Looking back, Terry often thought about how far she had come. If she could offer advice to others, it would be simple. Don't ignore what you feel inside. Be honest with yourself. And when the time comes, have the courage to live as the person you truly are. Because sometimes the life you've always imagined is closer than you think, just waiting for you to step into it.